Farris. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at ARENA, and it's my very great pleasure to introduce Minister Chris Bowen, Australia's Minister for Climate Change and Energy. He's going to be one of the busiest people at the COP for the next week, as you can well imagine, and I'm reliably informed that this is his first outing at the Australian Pavilion, I'm sure the first of many. So we're really delighted to welcome him, and please join me in welcoming Minister Chris Bowen. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe not the first of many, but the first, that's right. But an important one. Thanks for joining us in big numbers today for this very important panel. And one of the reasons I said yes to this event is because decarbonising metals is so important to our international decarbonisation journey, and something that Australia can play a real and meaningful and substantial international role in doing. When you think about the fact that steel alone is 8% of the world's emissions, metals in total 13% of the world's emissions. There's no net zero without decarbonising steel making, metals production. And it's something that Australia has made good progress in, with a lot more to do. And it's a very big part of our Future Made in Australia agenda, of course, with our green aluminium tax incentive, our green steel fund, and a very big part of our Future Made in Australia agenda. But it's also one in which, as important as Australia's role is, international collaboration is key, absolutely vital, because we can't do it all alone, and of course, by definition, green metals, green steel are part of an international supply chain. And so one country out on its own is not going to do it. And that's why events such as this, as part of COPs, are so important. And this is an important event with a very high quality panel to hear from. And there is so much more to do. And I'm pleased to say that I'm pleased to announce that we are signing up to the Deep Industrial Decarbonisation Initiative here at this COP. Again, another indication of our engagement. And this time last year I announced a joint partnership with Germany on a decarbonisation pathway. And we're very pleased to have Rahman here, who's one of the two lead authors of that process. And I'm sure that you'll enjoy and experience his insights today as part of this event. So I was just here really to kick this off. I am in the middle of a lot of negotiations, and not just about the most obvious things. I'm also co-facilitating the international negotiations on technology, which is quite a thing, as well as progressing our national interest on other matters which will be well known to you, and assisting the COP presidency in any way possible in what is a very difficult environment for the COP president in a challenged geopolitical environment. We are, in Australia, right up there in terms of support for the COP president and his important role in making sure that this COP is as successful as possible. So I'm not staying because other meetings do call, but I did just want to come and kick this off and thank the panel for participating. You've got a very high quality panel and a very serious event. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Minister, and I'm sure we'll all excuse him to get off and get into his busy work, and thank you so much for being with us. So if you've been around the Australian Pavilion this week, you'll know that we have a custom in Australia of acknowledging traditional owners. And I understand that here with us in Bellem we have around 5,000 First Nation leaders, which is fantastic. So I'd just like to acknowledge them, the role that First Nations people play in preserving some of the globe's most precious places, and recognise also the wisdom that they bring to these discussions. My name is Chris Farris. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of ARENA, and I'm delighted to be chairing this panel today. ARENA is Australia's renewable energy innovation agency, and we provide grants to pre-commercial clean technology innovation. Today's panel is a fantastic lineup. We've got representatives right across from industry, academia and the non-government sector, and I'll introduce them individually shortly. But before I do, what are we talking about when we talk about green metals? The way we frame this at ARENA under our strategic priorities is that we focus on areas where we can accelerate the transition to low emission steel, aluminium and critical energy minerals processing. There are obviously huge opportunities for Australia in all of these areas to decarbonise our industry and make significant contributions to global emissions reductions. And what we'll hear more about today is for doing that in partnership with countries right across the globe. So as the Minister said, the sector accounts for 7, 8, 9% of global emissions, depending on which report you believe. But for Australia in that is a huge opportunity. So we've got some of the best wind and solar resources in the world. We're the world's largest iron ore exporter, providing over 50% of global iron ore supply. And critically, and what we'll explore today, is that we're deeply connected into key global and Asia-Pacific markets in particular, with steelmakers in China, Korea, Japan, and India, and other places. So I'm going to introduce our panel now, and I'll introduce them one at a time and throw them a question. What we're hoping to do is have time for a bit of panel interaction at the end, and also questions from the audience. So, and we've got, check to watch, 42 minutes or so to get all of that done. So I'm first of all going to throw to Richard Karsanak. Richard leads the strategic imperative for green metals in Fortescue, Fortescue Future Industries. And so Richard is really bringing that industry perspective. What's happening now? What are the challenges? What's next? So I wanted to throw to you, Richard, first of all, and ask, what are you learning so far on the journey about green iron making? And what are the next few challenges that we'll need to tackle?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for that introduction. And first of all, I want to say it's an honour to represent Fortescue on this panel discussion on such an important topic. So, at Fortescue, we are working very hard to make Australia a leader in the green industrial revolution. It's not just through ambition, but we need to make it work in reality on the ground. In terms of what we're doing, I mean, this transition to green iron and steel is actually not optional anymore. It is an imperative for two reasons. I mean, as we've all heard, the steel industry itself is a hard-to-abate sector. It's one of the biggest pollutants in the world. So we clearly have to clean that up. But from an Australian perspective, it's absolutely essential that we find the way to keep Australian iron ores relevant in a decarbonised world, so that this massive iron ore industry of Australia will continue for decades to underpin the economy of the country and provide prosperity for the people for a long time into the future. So what's Fortescue doing about it? We're the fourth biggest iron ore producer in the world, 200 million tonnes roughly. We want to own the problem ourselves, not make it someone else's problem like the steel industry. So we are working hard to actually convert our iron ore into green iron ourselves for export to the steel industry, where they can convert it into steel. And the real challenge we have is finding a technology pathway that works for the type of ore that Australia produces, which is typically a low to mid-grade iron ore. So we are currently building a demonstration plant at our Christmas Creek mine site, and I like to call it our Mythbusters project. We will be demonstrating to the world with an end-to-end process that there is a technology solution that can take these low to mid-grade iron ores, convert them into green iron, very high purity products that can be used in any steel plant in the world. And we will start delivering that metal to the steel industry next year. So it's quite soon. And the next step for us, once we produce that commercially representative product, is to scale it up to commercial scale and bring all the partners along with us. And there are a number of partners that we do need to involve, from government to create enabling infrastructures. There's, energy solutions are critical, and it's bringing the Chinese might in renewable energy, manufacturing and technology. It's about ensuring that you can access financing at competitive rates, because it's a huge part of the overall cost. It's about creating a safe pathway for foreign investment into these opportunities, so that it doesn't all just rely on Australian money, and then ultimately developing a market for it. So there's a lot of work that we need to do, but we have seen with our work in Fortescue to date that there is a very genuine high confidence pathway going forward, and the world is starting to wake up to that, and we are very confident that it will be a reality in the very near future.
Fantastic. I think, Joe, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment because you talk about the economic opportunity, but you also talked about what's at risk. The Superpower Institute identified $120 billion that's at risk from our current fossil fuel exports around iron ore that need to be. We need a new solution, right, which is green iron. And then we've estimated, our studies have shown approximately $400 billion worth of to our economy by 2060. So it's not only just filling the gap that we have, that 120 billion, but it's actually improving our economy to take it forward. It's a huge economic opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I'm hearing a lot of people talking about both an opportunity as well as an imperative. So we've got this imperative to decarbonise. We need to do it as quickly as possible. But within that, for Australia, and we'll hear shortly for others as well, there is opportunity too. And the Superpower Institute's done some great work in articulating that and putting it into dollar terms, which is always a great way to convince people. Richard was talking, I'm going to throw to you, Raman. Professor Raman Dayan from the University of New South Wales, one of Australia's great innovation machines, if I can say so. He has recently, in March, I think, been in Europe and having this conversation into that market. He also has this great concept that I think resonates with what Richard was saying, which is value retention. So how do we both retain that value in Australia, but also critically link up those global supply chains and actually do that global decarbonising, which we all need to get cracking with as rapidly as we possibly can. So, Raman, I'm really interested to hear your perspectives from what you heard in Europe. What are they talking about? What are they thinking? What are they looking for from partnerships with Australia and others?
Thank you so much. So for those who might be aware, we have been working with the Germans and the Europeans. It's a broader conversation over the past 6 years now. And Chris, our work, it was less about the supply chain numbers. It was about a dialogue about what does Europe need and what can Australia provide. But it's not just a dig and ship model. And it's also not bottling up our sunshine and wind in the form of green metals as well. It's also about the technology integration. The universities coming in. There are a number of startups in Australia who are amazing providing this sort of technology as well. In our work, in our conversation, we touched on the certification side, the regulation side. We listened to the European concerns on social license. We listened to their concerns on manufacturing base shifting overseas. And that's how we tried approaching this green metal, green hydrogen, and derivative partnership. So in our experience, what we have seen effectively, if I talk about the partnership, the evolution would be in 3 waves. The first wave was obviously Europe's net zero commitment, and they understood early that they would need to import PTL, they would need to power to liquid, they would need to import biofuel, because Europe didn't have that. If they wanted to meet that demand themselves, they would have to increase their renewable grid by at least double it by 2050. And that's where countries such as Australia came in. We can do it at low cost with our solar, Martin Green Solar, with the electrolyzers up over here. But the problem of that supply chain, obviously, is it's a new supply chain, which would take some time to develop, and as we are seeing with the hydrogen and derivatives. Then the second wave came in, geopolitical development. What's been happening in Eastern Europe, some elections in some other part of the world. Europe is now communicating, we need to do this fast, but we also want to make sure our sovereign capabilities also retained. And that's bringing in the third wave, the green metal wave. A lot of the European companies, which were initially thinking of having their own green iron production, and I've visited a lot of these steel mills, they have plans for electrolyzers incorporation, or Australian ammonia going there and being cracked for hydrogen, and then subsequently for green iron production. They realize it's probably not going to happen. It's going to be expensive. And with that realization, the green metal interest, that boomed off. And that's the conversation today. So in our partnership, in our dialogue, what we communicate to Europe, to Germany, that look, taking green iron from Australia saves you 263 petajoule of hydrogen import and 20 terawatt hour of electricity requirement.
And a lot of weight as well.
And a lot of weight, absolutely. So those energy can be used for what Europe does best, specialty steel, for their manufacturing capability, right? But it allows us to have a bit of value addition for Australia. So in that sense, it's a win-win partnership.
And so the picture there, just linking up what Richard was saying with those comments there, is, value retention, extra processing onshore, doing that in a very low carbon way is obviously the goal, and then partnering up with people who are looking for those green steel inputs into their manufacturing, whether it be the German car makers or other European industry. So fascinating to hear that linkage. I'm going to throw to Joe Kay next. No stage at the COP is any good at all unless Joe is on it, and I think she's been doing lots of work around the Australian Pavilion. Joe works for the Superpower Institute, for those in the Australian context, founded by Ross Garnaut and Rod Sims to really drive and articulate that renewable energy superpower vision. But she's also very exposed and very experienced in Asia, having lived in India and China and other locations. So Joe, I'm really interested to hear your reflections. So Raman's talked to us about that European opportunity. What does it look like when we come closer to home and think about the Asia Pacific?
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologise because I'm actually on this stage a lot today, so you are going to get very tired of my voice. But just to the point as well, our studies find actually that with the European Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the CBAM, we actually see that our green iron will be quite cost comparative to ship to Europe, which is quite extraordinary. And we talk about that a lot in our New Energy Trade book, which was released by Dr. Ruben Finnegan last year. I think the opportunity in Australia is ours because we have a comparative advantage around a lot of renewables, and we also have all of the green metals as well. So we can actually produce these at scale. We can embed decarbonisation into these products before we ship them overseas. This is something our trading partners don't have the luxury of. They don't have the space to be able to have renewables at the same scale that we do. So we should be using that to our advantage, and it's certainly economically very advantageous for us, but it's also politically very advantageous to us as well, having supply chains and links with others in our region, our key trading partners, who are historically already traditional trading partners, so the likes of China and India, and certainly our trading partners in Japan and the Republic of Korea as well. I'll talk a little bit about India, I think, just to start with, because they have a huge ambition, and they also have. It's quite complex, right? So there's multiple states in India. Every state has their own kind of pathway, and then you have the central government, which is incredibly ambitious, and under Prime Minister Modi, certainly very, very willing to put money on the table to actually produce green iron, but also the feedstock to make that, the green hydrogen. There's lots of incentives that he's done to do that. The challenge is, though, they have a huge domestic demand, and then they also have ambition for export as well. So we see there's a lot of complementarity with the Australian opportunity, but they also potentially could be a competitor for us in the region. So we have to work really closely together so that we can be afforded the opportunity for us all to be successful. China, we already have, obviously, and Richard spoke about this, really great relationships, trade pathways already with China. I met an Australian magnetite miner in South Australia recently. I'll try not to give away who it was. They own 5 magnetite mines. They also own the infrastructure between the mines to the port, and they also own the port as well. So they have a full pit-to-port program that they can run. Their off-takers, their buyers for their current iron ore are chomping at the bit, I would say. They are so eager to get green iron because there's an opportunity for them to have a point of difference in China, particularly if it goes into steel in the automotive industry. I understand it's $200 US dollars per car if you put green steel into a car, very easily absorbed in that market. So the opportunities are huge with our trading partners, and we talk about a future made in Australia. We talk about Australia being a superpower, but none of those things happen without partnerships from others in the region. So we released another reiteration of our green iron report just a few months ago when our CEO, Bathan Mullen, was in Japan for World Expo, hosted at the brilliant Australia Pavilion there with Nancy Gordon. And it really looked at what is the opportunity in that relationship between Australia and Japan. And it's really about how does Australia become part of Japanese domestic supply chain for that green iron piece, as well as the steel piece. So we don't want to take the steel industry away from Japan. Actually, we want to enable more high value jobs, and we want to create that partnership. I think the thing that we often forget about is the importing back in of these goods as well. And that's certainly something that we're looking at in our research as well. So it's exciting. I think we're really well placed. I read a report recently that said, Brazil, fantastic and wonderful hosts of COP, but they can't get any closer to Asia than we are. We also have no contested trade routes. So all of our existing trade routes go completely straight up to Japan and the Korean Peninsula, as well as over to China as well. So we have an incredible comparative advantage domestically, but we're also very well stead to support the decarbonisation of our trading partners in the region.
Raman, you want to jump in on that?
So just wanted to add a little bit on the South Korean opportunity. So as some of you might be knowing, that South Korea was really looking forward at importing Australian ammonia. And I visited South Korea this year in May. Looking at those sort of GENCOs, the huge 20,000 megawatt coal power plant facilities they have, they were showing me the spot for where the ammonia would be coming in, and they would then be co-blending with coal and everything. And then we had POSCO on the side. And they actually acknowledged that maybe the ammonia would come later. Maybe it will be green iron that will come first, because POSCO needs that for meeting its immediate demand today, not tomorrow.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Richard, I want to throw to you on, I guess, on the technology piece, but I think there's an interesting point in there, Raman, about the driver that we're seeing through national policy making in other countries where they have often quite ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals, and they're looking to see how they can decarbonise their supply chains. Richard, the question I wanted to throw to you is around technology. So you're responsible for delivering Fortescue's green metal technology strategy, and we often can fall into the trap of thinking it's a dig and ship model. We've actually got decades of experience and knowledge and know-how, and university research like Raman's got. I'm interested if you can tell us a little bit about the innovation that you're going to need to see to drive it at the industry end. And I'm not going to ask you to give away any intellectual property that's commercial, but fascinated to hear a story of the innovation that's going to be required that is going to get us to where we want to be.
Thank you. That is an interesting one. And when you think about the technologies to take carbon out of the iron and steel making process and turn it into a green one, there are kind of three pathways that you can look at. So you can look at a hydrogen pathway where you remove the oxygen from the iron ore with hydrogen and make water vapor. That's the most popular one. There's an electrochemical pathway, which is an emerging technology where essentially you turn iron making into a chemical operation, refining it, and you strip all the impurities out by essentially dissolving them in some form of chemical substrate, and then you apply electricity in an electrolysis cell, and that removes all of the oxygen, leaving behind the iron, which you recover. So Fortescue and others around the world are working on that technology, and it has the potential to really be a game changer in terms of energy efficiency of iron making. And absolutely that will have its role to play in the coming years. And then there's the weird and wacky, which is not the official term, but there are a lot of other emerging technologies, from hydrogen plasmas to lasers to everything else. And again, each of them has their own sort of advantage and other challenges which are being worked through. But from our perspective, because we don't believe we have the luxury of time, we are focusing our efforts in terms of implementation right now on the hydrogen pathway while we're co-developing the other technologies, so that we will be at the forefront of the industry when they come into being. Can I actually steal a microphone for one other thing?
You've got it, so use it.
Yeah, I'll have it while I've got it. So I did a speech this morning at the China Pavilion, and as some of you may know, Fortescue sends about 90-something% of our iron ore to China. So we are very, very strongly associated with China. So we have been working with the Chinese steel mills and government about how we can convince them that a rapid decarbonization of their steel industry is a good thing. So China has a 2060 target. So we commissioned the preeminent university, Tsinghua University, to do some research on an accelerated decarbonization of the Chinese steel industry by 2050, and accelerating it by importing 100 million tons of green iron from a country like Australia. It could be anywhere in the world, but let's say Australia. So what we needed to be able to convince them is that this did not create a net loss of jobs in the country, that it created economic growth, that there were health benefits and other economic benefits. And the emerging findings coming out of that are absolutely fascinating. So by accelerating their decarbonisation by 10 years with the 100 million tonnes of green iron, they will eliminate 1.7 billion tonnes of CO2 by 2060, which has a carbon value to the Chinese economy of nearly 2.5 trillion renminbi. So it doesn't matter what currency you're talking about, it's a lot of money. In terms of jobs, you know, iron making is actually not very labor intensive. The steel making is where the technology and the labor actually sits. So even if there are some small losses in the iron making side, because China will be supplying all of the renewable energy assets and things that are made in China and exported, and they can build the green iron plants in China and export them to Australia for assembly in Australia, there would be massive job creation in supporting industries that would more than offset any job losses in the iron and steel industry. Is that rain? So, yeah, I mean, when you looked at the numbers, you know, for Australia to make 100 million tonnes of green iron, which would be fantastic for Australia and secure our future, it actually creates trillions of dollars of value for the Chinese economy. It accelerates their energy industry and everything in China, their manufacturing capability. So ultimately, this isn't a win-lose scenario. This isn't about Australia taking control of green iron making at the expense of Japan or Germany or China or anything else. If you can find your niche in the green metal ecosystem, you can, you know, it's unlimited, the opportunity for any country that participates in it. And that is the challenge for our industry, whether we're talking to the Germans or the, you know, Koreans, Japanese, Chinese, each of them will have their particular opportunity to benefit from this. And finding that in a way that will create value in the industry and a win-win is absolutely critical to making it work quickly.
Amazing. I'm not sure that this mic is rainproof. I think this one's much better. Excellent. Fascinating also, Richard, within that study with Tsinghua University, I think you said health benefits, job benefits, there's a huge unlock here, so not just the economic kind of benefit. I wanted to explore with Raman and Joe, and then audience, you guys are on notice. We're going to open it up for questions after that. This international cooperation, so I've sort of jotted down some notes, and I think there's sort of at least three kind of ways that can work, and I'm keen to hear from you guys about that. So the one we've really been focusing on is how do we decarbonise those global supply chains? So how can we get that input into China, Germany, our trading partners, essentially pre-processed and decarbonised? But there's two other areas that I wanted to explore with Raman and Joe, very qualified people to talk about it. The first is international technology cooperation. So how can we take some of the ideas that are coming out of Australian universities and industry and kind of help others on their journey? And then maybe that one's for you, Raman, and then maybe one for you, Joe. We've heard at other sessions today the foreign investment kind of opportunity as well. So we don't have to do this alone. And to Richard's point, if we do it well, there's huge kind of global benefit. So who might we be thinking about as inward investors who can kind of help us on that journey? So Raman, I'll throw to you first on the international tech cooperation, and then Joe maybe to you on foreign investment, and then we'll see if we've got any questions from the audience.
Thank you. This is very close to home, so I'll very happy answer it. So one of the outcome from our first high supply project, which was DFAT and DISER supported Australia-Germany supply chain, was a project called Highgate, which, thank you, Chris, Arena funded with PTJ up in Germany. And the reason of that collaboration was bringing in Australian and German low TRL, low technological readiness level technology within that supply chain. And out of that came 4 projects. Some are in feed, front-end engineering design, looking into the sort of supply chain in the form of either ammonia, liquid fuel, different sort of hydrogen vector. Because it's important to understand that we all don't have strength in certain aspects. In Australia, and I'll talk a little bit about my own research, right, which has a high gate funding. We can develop catalyst, which we mine in Australia, low-cost minerals, but we're not very good at scaling up. We found out the Germans were excellent in scaling up, the Fraunhofer Institute, the DLRs. And so by collaborating together, we actually could get a few centimeter square systems into a kilowatt system very quickly. So that's the power of collaboration. Now, Germany obviously is a developed country, but this is also an opportunity for Australia to partner with universities in India or companies in India. What we have been trying to do is working with them, exploring, sharing some of our knowledge. The knowledge sharing report sometimes does help. And then with this sort of academic discourse and dialogue, we really talk about these are the learnings from scaling up some of these systems. Now, you might be aware, a lot of people know UNSW, that's where the Park solar cells came up and were invented. But there are next generation solar cells that we're trying to look into so that we can reduce that cost of hydrogen, reduce that cost of green iron production, improve on that electrolysis pathway for iron making, and at the same time, make all these sort of systems with material that you can effectively mine in Australia, or we can scale up with our international partners.
And that PERC example is extraordinary. I mean, arguably Australia's greatest contribution to global decarbonisation was the technology developed at UNSW and then massively scaled in China and bringing down the cost of solar cells by 90% over the last 10 years. So probably a really good example of the tech to scale to global impact. So thanks for that. Joe, foreign investment, who are our partners? How do we play? Why would they come and invest in Australia?
I love that everyone thinks that I know all the people with the money. So that's fantastic. I just want to reiterate, though, before I answer that question, the value of our academic institutions. I know we've got Adelaide University here, Monash University over here, obviously University of New South Wales. It is one of our best exports as well. We've got so much talent within the universities. The example of Martin Green is great. SunDrive also came out of there. We've got Spark Hydrogen down in South Australia as well, doing direct hydrogen production through photovoltaics. There's so much happening within our research institutes that are going to catapult the technology that we need to actually make these industries go forward and go forward very quickly. I think the investment piece is a really interesting one, right? So we need foreign investment into Australia to make this happen, and we do that through really great joint ventures or partnerships. We need to be able to encourage that investment. We need to have an investment portfolio in Australia that allows it to be navigated in a very easy way. I know the Treasurer Jim Chalmers has created a front door for the Foreign Investment Review Board, which will be very helpful for that. But we also have every state in Australia as well having different investment opportunities. So navigating that as a foreign investor can be very difficult. So I really appreciate the work of DFAT and Austrade helping our foreign investors be able to do that. I have seen some really great examples previously in the hydrogen industry where you had, in a coalition, you actually had the off-takers. So everyone was part of the consortium for the projects in Australia. So we had Japanese consortium holders, we had finance from Singapore, and then local development as well. Being able to bring people in, to encourage that investment, and also recognise that Australia is a very sound investment place. It's a good place to keep your money. We're politically stable, and we've got good opportunities here. So, yeah, perhaps we can, I know there was a question before about super funds. We can unlock some of those super funds as well. We'll be able to accelerate that.
Joe, you should keep people guessing that you know all the people with the money, because maybe that's why you're on every stage so far
That's
this
right,
week.
that's right. I just need them to turn the aircon on.
Just looking to the audience to see if we've got any comments, questions, reactions, observations, challenges. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for that insightful comments. Nikki Hutley, working with the Climate Council in Australia and an economist. So very interested in this pathway. But it seems to me a couple of years ago we were still talking about Australia doing green steel. Now we've kind of gone, that's not that realistic, we're going to green iron. I also do a bit of work in India, and India has very much a mantra of India for India, and we're now in a global environment where national economic security is a lot more of a priority. I worry that we're kind of going to take too long and potentially miss the boat on this, or at least that the opportunity won't arise to the extent that the most optimistic view thinks it will. Can you reassure myself and the audience that this is a genuine opportunity, particularly when you think about the cost of hydrogen here compared to, say, India or China?
Great question. I think I might throw that to Richard, who's at the pointy end of this and can give us a precise month
Thanks,
for
Nikki.
the first international export.
Yeah, these are, no, I think it's working. I'll start at the end. I mean, how quickly can we do it? I can only speak on behalf of Fortescue, but as you know, Dr. Andrew Forrest is quite a strong-willed person, and his vision is that Fortescue will stop being an iron ore exporter, and we will export iron in the form of iron units, iron metal, and he would like us to be doing 100 million tons of green iron by 2040, so, or give or take a few years. So pretty quickly, and that would, that is a huge amount. In terms of energy, that would require around 200 gigawatts of installed renewable energy capacity, which is 3 times the whole of Australia's grid at the moment. So it's not impossible, but it is a big task, and getting that right will require so much cooperation across government, industry, foreign nations, the whole lot to make that work. What was the other part of your question? I just want to make sure. Oh yes, the competitive element. So I'll start with the energy one. So I mean, Australia obviously has almost unlimited solar resources. It's fantastic, and we have lots of land. Does take some time to get approvals to do things on the land, but that's for good reason. When you look at other nations, whether it's India or China, very few of them can compete with the quality of the solar that we have. But even in the pockets of land where they do have comparable renewable energy generating capacity, whether it's wind or solar, the challenge there is that you don't, it's not either or. It's not that they would do it and we can't do it, or we do it and they can't do it. But it also gives a lot of optionality. So when I think about the China work that we were doing, China has the capacity to install something like 16,000 gigawatts of solar power in Inner Mongolia alone. But when you look at the scale of the Chinese economy and you look at their strategic imperatives about, global leadership and artificial intelligence and data centers and all that kind of stuff, they will most likely prioritize their renewable energy for those sectors before they do for the steel industry. And what that means is, though, even though they do have access to lots of generating capacity, it won't be available for the sectors that we are focusing on. And when it is available for those sectors, all the cheap stuff has been used up. I mean, it's basic economics. So as the cost curve ramps up from renewable energy, the steel industry will be coming into the part of the cost curve that would definitely not be competitive with Australia. So the opportunity for us, and I know Ross Garner has a very similar view, and it's somewhat a function of timing and picking your battles. We need to focus our efforts on the things that we want to deal with and let other countries do theirs.
Nikki, I think, was also raising iron versus steel. I just wondered if you wanted to say anything about that.
Okay, now you're going to get me going. So, I mean, personally, I'm not a believer in trying to do the steel, and I know Fortescue's not either. I mean, ultimately, as a company, we are in the iron game, iron ore at the moment, iron in the future. Our customers are steel producers. It's never good business to compete with their customers. But the steel industry is actually quite a technologically complex industry, and there are 3,500 different types of steel. So if we are going to be producing steel, which steel are we going to produce, and how are we going to use it? And I mean, I went to the ArcelorMittal plant in Pecém, near Fortaleza last week. They produce 580 different steel grades. And that plant produces almost as much steel as the whole of Australia. So you kind of, again, it's a pick your battle thing. Is that really what we should be doing? Maybe in the future it is what we should be doing. But Australia is not a huge consumer of steel, so we don't have the market for it like India or China or Germany or things like that. So maybe stick to what we're good at.
I really enjoyed that question because I actually started my career working in national security. And so whenever I think about the opportunities for green iron or green steel, I think about it from a sovereign risk perspective. And I agree with you. I think actually it's not our comparative advantage making steel in Australia. We do have some opportunities, but there is a sovereign reason that we need to do it. There is a reason to retain that talent, those skill sets within Australia. It's not the biggest one, so I don't think we should be pouring a huge amount of money into it, but we do need it, right? We only have one steel mill that's kind of working, which is Whyalla, and it's going through a process of being resold. For those that are across it, you'll know it well. So I think that it's important we do retain that capability, but it's about where we can actually get the most out of it. And certainly our position at TSI is the green iron is the piece of the pie that we need to be in. I also think historically we use steel and iron very interchangeably without much knowledge. I think now we're far better at talking about green iron in a more intelligent and considered way. I also want to point out that Mission Possible Partners are doing their Build Clean Now program. They launched talk at Climate Week a few months ago. That actually has a pipeline of projects in Australia that are actually going to be doing green iron, as well as green hydrogen and other things as part of this industrial piece. So we do actually have a big pipeline of opportunities in Australia and projects that are going to be going to FID shortly. So if you aren't already or across the MMP's work, I strongly suggest you do.
Thanks, Joe. I think we've got a question in the front row here.
Thank you. Another one for you, Joe. Gavin McFadgen from the Australian Conservation Foundation. So where would you, for the next round of like Future Made in Australia support, how would you target that? Where would it go? And how would you sequence that over time to get this up and running?
Yeah, I think from a TSI's perspective, we're just about to release a carbon solutions levy report. So hopefully that would be where some of that funding would go. We certainly see that there's a good opportunity to have a price on carbon. That is what we would like to see. We know politically that might not take off, but actually putting money into those industries. Our Green Iron report suggested in order to fix that, the market failures and back that in is actually in lieu of a carbon price is to create a production tax credit at $170 per tonne, which then can be stacked against the hydrogen production tax incentive as well, which is the $2 per kilo for green hydrogen. The second thing we suggested, there was 5 recommendations, but the second one that's financially based is the 30% of capital funding. So actually backing in those exact projects, getting them up and running. I don't think we can do everything, but I think we certainly need to choose a winner and lock it in and get it done. We can't wait for the offtake. We just need to get it done.
So just on that note, so what we have been also looking, because a couple of years back we were talking about let's bet everything on hydrogen derivative. Now we're talking about green iron, right? So we've been approaching this capital allocation question on looking at something called a gross value for money model, looking at what retains the most value for Australia. Where can we really evaluate? Where does it create most jobs? And from the circularity of the economy, how much cash can really be retained up in Australia? So that's the approach that we have been trying to create, an open source type of an aspect to inform government. Should you be informing, subsidizing or providing funding for green iron, ammonia, or low carbon liquid fuel?
Thanks, Rowan. I think I want to qualify that a little bit by going back to Richard's comment. So I think there's definitely that value retention at a national level. But Richard, I think I heard you say there's plenty of this to go around, and actually all decarbonising together is great for everyone. So maybe just a quick comment from you about the balance between, like, do we have to choose between value retention in Australia versus sort of sharing the benefits with trading partners and others?
Well, there really is a lot to go around. I mean, even if Australia only plays in a part of the value chain, that value chain is so big. I mean, the global steel industry is just astronomically huge, and we also need to recognise that, you know, things take time. So Australia can't become a 500 million tonne producer of iron in the next 10 years. It's just you'll never get there. So we should be running as fast as we can and doing what we can, but ensuring that we're competitive means that we need to access the strengths of our trade partners around the world. You know, access the might of a country like China that can produce the renewable energy assets. We need to access finance from wherever it's cheapest, hopefully in Australia, but there will be other countries that can provide, you know, sovereign rate green bonds and things like that. We need to allow that. We need to allow some level of investment from from foreign companies into this because they want to be part of the chain, and it's not all strategically risky for the country to allow them into it in island and systems, for example. So yeah, I think we just need to we need to maybe just step back a little bit and think about it carefully as to where the risks and opportunities are. Have a good long look at ourselves and think about what our real strengths are, and the value that we're adding, and not think we can do everything, and bring the right partners in.
Thanks. That might be a good note to end on, because for me, I think what we've said there is there's an Australian comparative advantage, there's a partnership play, and there's a global benefit if we get this right. So I think it's a really nice way to wrap that up. So with that, please join me in thanking our panel, Professor Raman Diamond, Joe Kay from the Superpower Institute, and Richard Karsanek from Fortescue Industries. Thank you.